start my stream. See what happens. Uh, all right. I'd like to say hello to everybody, and that something's going on. Yeah, I'd like to say hello. I'd like to say hello, and that to everybody. Let me hit my little record button. My connections are good. All right. I'd like to say hello and welcome everyone to this commentary. It's called 12-Step Recovery, um, from darkness to the light, from the darkness to the light. And this is a third installment on a particular piece I've been working on for the past couple of days. Today is November the 3rd, and it's about 11:49 at nighttime, which is really 12:49 because we just went back an hour. So anyway, I'm gonna get this thing started. This is from the one I did, a continuation. This is actually a continuation from the piece that I did yesterday. And let me dip down and get my notes. And the one that I did yesterday was called, it was called AA 12-Step Recovery, the journey from darkness to the light. And that, you can go on and get that piece, and it's two segments, November 1st, November 2nd. And now we're on November the 3rd. And so my goal is to give my experiences from the on my 12-step journey. Tonight, what happened last night, and I'm just going to do a brief cap, and I want to make sure I'm on my favorite camera. And last night, when I'm doing this, it's always something happening. What happened was last night was my favorite camera went out. Camera one. So, like, this is camera one. That's the one I'm on now. That's the one that went out last night. This is camera two. Right here is camera two, and it's going to be popping up in about 3 or 4 seconds because I got about a 5 to 10 second delay. So this is camera two. And this one right here is camera three. So I got 3 cameras. And so this is camera three. So I'm going to be looking at camera three when it pop up. And so certain things I have to watch is my ansos, and so forth. My vocabulary is just terrible. I have a very terrible vocabulary, and I'm working on it, and bear with me. I also have allergies and sinus problems, so I'm going to be sniffing and picking at my nose, and then I got the thing where I push my glasses up, so forth. So anyway, this is part of my affliction. So what happened was, jumping into this thing, last night I was talking about from the darkness to the light, and I went over trauma, which I'm not going to go into too depth again, and to give too much depth to, because I got a couple videos on that. And what I'm trying to do, my goal is to go from the darkness into the light. And when I say the darkness of addiction, the darkness of an active addiction, the darkness, and when I say active, of its symptoms, drugs, alcohol, prostitution, overeating, selling drugs, selling alcohol, gambling, workaholic, promiscuous sexual activity, or a sex addiction. So these are the symptoms of addiction, where addiction make up obsessive and compulsive behavior, which I talked about last night, resulting in total self-centeredness. It's brought on by, for a lot of people, a traumatic event in their lives. And I went over the 4 phases of trauma, which are acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma, and then also post-traumatic stress trauma. These are 4 types of trauma. And so you have in acute trauma where an individual has an event in their life that happens one time, where they have a dangerous or threatening situation that happens to them in their lives. Where you have chronic trauma, a person have the same type, a dangerous event, a seriously dangerous event that happened in their lives, but it happens reoccurringly, like abusive relationship. And then in complex trauma, an individual can have 3 or more events of trauma, 2 or more events of trauma at the same time happening in their lives. They could have a car accident, be in an abusive relationship, lost their job, seen a murder, or even done a murder, rape, molestation, these type of things, all going on at the same time. And then with PTSD, post-traumatic, let me look at that. In the PSD, which is called post-traumatic stress disorder, that type of trauma will happen to a youth. Someone that's considered a youth, maybe a minor. And it composes of some of the stuff I just mentioned. And then as a result of these types of trauma, which is the breeding ground of different types of disorders, actually, which is the breeding ground of obsessive and compulsive behavior. As a defense mechanism, the individual will develop certain types of behaviors to actually protect themselves. And that's why I say trauma is the breeding ground of obsessive and compulsive, which results in total self-centered, not self-centered, but total. And it's important that the word total self-centered is used, because there's a difference between self-centered and total self-centered. Self-centered could be just mild. It could be very, very mild. Where total self-centered is just basically a person who don't just give a damn about nothing or nobody but themselves. Well, a self-centered person, they might, have 3 hot dogs and give you and give you and your buddy one. Y'all split that. Right. So moving on with the obsessive and the compulsive, which at some point a person will pick up what is called a physical symptom. Drugs, alcohol, gambling, promiscuous sexual behavior, prostitution. I qualify prostitution as a symptom. Why? Because prostitution, like a drug seller or dealer, what happens is the individual will usually try to maintain some type of control over their customers. Right. That not only is it for profit or for some type of a gain, but control is somewhere in it, just like inside of drug dealing. Drug dealing, sure, is money involved, but believe me, it's also control is involved in that. So you have obsessive and compulsive behavior, and then I had described the obsession is, and let me flip over to my notes right quick, because you know, and I'm just doing a recap. And so what I said about obsession was a fixed idea that takes us back time and time again to our particular drug or some substitute. And some substitute qualifies behaviors. Because when drugs are out, when the physical symptoms are out of the way, the behavior usually comes in. And to recapture the ease, to recapture the ease we once knew, and compulsion. Inside of compulsion is one having started the process, and the process is the addiction, which also could be the physical addiction, but also the spiritual addiction, the behavior. So we have a spiritual reaction, and then we have a physical reaction. So moving on, compulsion. Once having started the process with one fixed pill drink, I put spoonful for food, game of chance, sexual behavior, and to include promiscuous sexual activity. It says we cannot stop through our own power of will because of our physical sensitivity to drugs. We are completely in the grip of a destructive power greater than ourselves. And when I said we, what I mean when I say we, I mean mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. That's what I mean when I say the we. So when I'm going through my commentaries and I use the term we, that's what I mean. I don't mean we as a group, because there ain't nobody down here but me and my allergies. And I sure ain't talking about that, right? When you're talking about a power greater than oneself, what I'll usually be talking about something on two levels, either the physical level or on the spiritual level, or the physical realm or the spiritual realm, either the third dimension or the fourth dimension. And I'm going there, right? So moving on, I talked about trauma being the darkness. And then, of course, I'll go over them again. In acute trauma is the level of trauma when an individual experiences a single stressful or dangerous event. A single stressful or dangerous event. And then inside chronic trauma, it occurs when that single stressful or single stressful, or dangerous event is reoccurring. It's a reoccurring event. You know, like being inside of an abusive relationship, or being repeatedly molested and raped, or being a victim of an accident. You have a car accident, and then you go somewhere and you have some type of a physical accident. But mainly is geared towards like relationships and conditions that a person might experience. I mean, you can have a hostile environment on your job. You know, you can have a hostile environment in your school where bullying is going on. So then the next one is complex trauma. And inside of complex trauma, you have two or more events going on with you at the same time, with the examples that I just gave. And then in post-traumatic stress disorder, which occurs to an individual in their youth. And so it's traumatic events 1, 2, and 3 that happens to an individual in their youth. So moving on. Now, when talked about or mentioned powers greater than oneself, what what I want to make clear when I use the term power, or powers greater than oneself, I mean anything that, and I'll go back and I'll go back to the definition that I had for obsession because it gave it really, really well. It says, we cannot stop through our own willpower. So a power greater than oneself is something that affects one's willpower. And what is one's willpower made up? The simplicity is the willpower is equal to mental, physical, spiritual, and the emotional makeup. That's what the willpower is. And the not being able to apply. Not being able to apply. So let me make that clear. One's own will on the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional level. That's what that's about. So moving on, let me finish this definition. It says we cannot stop through our own willpower because of our physical sensitivity to drugs. And here it points out drugs. And what I'm going to call drugs at this time are your symptoms. If you have suffer from obesity, we're going to call it food. Your obsession and compulsive behavior towards food. Then there's drugs, a person that used drugs and used alcohol. Their obsessive and compulsive behavior towards drugs and alcohol where they cannot apply their own willpower. Then you have your drug dealers. At some point, they are associated with the drugs and addiction. And even though they might not use, it's the lifestyle that they're addicted to. And they develop obsessive and compulsive disorder. And yes, at some point, for most dealers, they come from some type of a trauma, a traumatic background, if you listen to their stories. And I'm not talking about the ones that just picked up drug dealing and because they could afford to. I'm talking about the ones that took the risk, got out there and started hustling, built up a clientele, made them some money, and then part of the perceived fruits was being in control of other people's lives. Because you're here, you gave my kid a college education, or you bought me a new car, or I had sex with your mama or your sister, or even your brother, for that matter, your daddy. So anywhere with some type of a degradation or, how can I say, where an individual flexed a muscle. So moving on, I don't want to spend too much time on that, on the why drug dealing is such a addiction. So where the physical aspect, a person is sensitive to their symptom. And then it says, we are completely in the grip of a destructive power greater than ourselves. And this is where I'm qualifying a power greater than oneself as the symptoms. Now, the physical symptoms, and that's on the physical level. Now, going back on the spiritual side, the principles that the individual practiced, and I have classified those as dark principles, because what's involved a lot of time inside of drug addiction and alcoholism, which I kind of wrote a few things down. As a result of trauma, we can get resentment, which is a bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly, reliving the past anger over and over again in one's mind as if it happened today. And I qualified yesterday the past as anything approximately 3 months and before. So if you live in the past anger in your mind about something, about an unresolved issue in your mind that happened 3 months and how far you want to go back, you're living in resentment. Excuse me. Then I talked about anger and fear, you know, which these two are powers greater than the individual that results in let me see if I can find, did I write down that? Okay, anger, a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. And then for fear, I wrote an unpleasant emotion. Fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. These are, I call, powers greater than oneself. But also they have their synonyms, because inside their synonyms are also powers greater than oneself. And the power is something that's able to affects one's ability to do something. You know, so moving on with this, and then I'm going to come back with the power, showing the relationship between power, and powers, and how they affect spirituality. So I want to move on and give some the definitions of what I call, what I came to when I talked about earlier about the makeup of the human will, or the makeup of the human being. And I said mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And for the sake of all my commentaries, I'm going to qualify those this way. On the mental, when I say mental, what I mean is your intellect. What I mean is your intellect. When I say emotional, what I mean is individuals' devotion towards something. When I talk about the spiritual or the spiritual side, I'm talking about their energy from within. I'm not talking about any type of religion. I'm not talking about any type of religious personality. I'm talking about spirituality. Why? Because the 12 steps is a spiritual program, not religious. Says it in all their literature, except if you go to a spiritual program like the 12 Steps for Christ or the Siratul Mustaqim, which Muslims go to. And I'm quite sure the Jews, the Jewish faith has one that's connected to their religion. And the difference is, in these religions that I just mentioned, or other philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism and so forth, they're connected to the dogma of that religion. The dogma of that religion. But in spirituality, there's no dogma. I'm sorry. It's strictly principles. It's strictly spiritual principles that we deal with, or that is dealt with. So moving on with that, when I speak of the physical part, I'm talking about something you could see, feel, or touch, or smell. Something that the senses are activated, however, mainly on the physical plane. This is what I'm talking about. So moving on, because I'm going somewhere, and I'm just doing a recap of what I did last night. Why? Because when I get to the 12 steps in this segment, I'm going to be going back to some of this, to some of the material that I just covered. So, anyone just tuning in, when I go over the step process, then you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about. All right, so moving on. And so moving on, when I talked about the powers greater than oneself, I talked about resentment, I talked about anger, I've talked about fear, and I'll go into a few more. On the negative side, you have lying, deceitfulness, self-pity, and let me flip my little page over here again. Self-pity, and because I need to get this on the head, and then of course the resentment, the anger, the fear, anxiety, suspicion, unease, dread, dismay. These are some of the sub characteristics of resentment, anger, and fear. Annoyance, displeasure, dismay, rage, doubt, and so moving on. These are powers greater than oneself. Why? Because these synonyms that I just mentioned can change one's mind. They could affect one's will, and I said could. They can. There are also different forms of insanity. There are also forms of insanity. So on the resentment, the anger, and the fear, of course, and I talked about resentment being non-acceptance of the past or having a past anger relived, and then I talk about anger, a person being angry at the present, and then fear, a person approaches the future with a certain amount of fear and cautious that they actually live in doubt, in a certain amount of doubt in certain areas. Now, let me say this, because a person might exhibit some of this stuff, don't mean that they won't be successful. Nah, it doesn't mean that. But however, these characteristics do exist. Now, on the spiritual side or on the light side, there's also characteristics: acceptance, love, faith, and let me find my favorite list, because I got a little favorite list up in here too. And yeah, faith, anonymity. Not only it was something going on upstairs. Anonymity, and then love, which is unconditional love, agape love, and I'm gonna find my favorite list, because I got I got a little favorite list around here. And then caring, sharing, service to others. Not only do I have service to others, we have. Let me flip it over right here. I bet it's right here, in front of my face. So anyway, I'll get into more. As we go on. Power is greater than oneself. So anyway, as we approach the 12 steps from the darkness of traumatic event of a traumatic event. I did say acceptance, right? So what happens is, I talked about the bottom, hitting bottom. And actually what hitting bottom meant And inside the hitting bottom piece, I'm going to read that. And I wrote, for hitting bottom, for simplicity, when one hits a bottom or a rock bottom, the individual will experience a force or power so great it will be equal to or greater than that the traumatic forces or powers of influence that resulted from that traumatic experience or that initial traumatic experience that took them into addiction, or the different phases or levels of the addiction or alcoholism. And it affected them mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And so basically what I was saying about the bottom is when an individual hits bottom from their addiction is that they get to a point where they have suffered a pain or a counter-traumatic event that was powerful enough to offset their initial traumatic event. So it's like a balance of power. And that's what I believe has to happen. I believe anything less than that, from what I've seen in my experience, you haven't hit a bottom. Because what happens is a person usually used. And yeah, people would say, well, you know, they wanted to use. That's only part of the equation. The other part is that they had what's called a reservation. And a reservation occurs when there's no solid hitting of that bottom. They didn't hit that bottom with, you know, one of my friends call it the ass whooping. When their ass whooping was it was so great that even the thought of doing something caused tremors and chills all over their body. Just like for me, it's certain things that I don't mess with anymore. You know, I've been in recovery for 34 years, 5 months, and some days and some change. And there's certain conversations I ain't having. I'm saying conversations. It's certain people I'm not being around. That's right. Not me. Certain conversations I'm not having, certain people I'm not being around, you know, and I could tell you all about them. So moving on, once the bottom is hit, the person is what I call at ground zero. They're up from the bottom and they're ready to move forward. And that readiness is called open-minded. When bottom is hit, there's no denial. Because what takes place in an act of addiction is denial. A person is in denial about their situation concerning addiction. They're in denial. What the bottom does is do away with that denial. But see, denial is such complex. It's so complex, and it's a complex system that if it's not treated, accordingly, it will reoccur, and it will morphosize into something else. Remember when I talked about when I gave the definition of, I believe it was compulsion, and then it says we cannot stop through our own power of will because of our physical sensitivity to drugs. We are completely in the grip of a destructive power greater than ourselves. Well, part of that destructive power And when you look at power, what moves power is energy. Excuse me. Power moves energy. So, although power can be one thing, once it starts moving energy, it could turn into something else. And that's just a little physics right there, but it's true. Because energy is neither is created nor is destroyed, but it can evolve. And understand this, all science is the same. Whether you're dealing in the metaphysical science or you're dealing in the practical science, science is science. So let me move on because I want to get into the step process. So what happens when the bottom is hit, denial is removed. It's removed. Not all of it. Here's the kicker. It's removed to a point where a person can entrench themselves into the recovery process, because denial will always be a part of the recovery process. But what the individual wants to remove is complete denial. Complete denial, where the many facets or of the complexities of denial have been actually blown away, nuclear blasted. And the reason why I say there's going to always be some type of a denial is because usually that's where a person starts. When a person tells me, oh, man, you just an alcoholic. You like to drink? No, I ain't no alcoholic. I don't drink. I don't drink as much as little Tommy. I still got my job. What you talking about? So there's always a certain amount of denial, even with the behavior. Some people can say, you just rude. You just vulgar. You say, well, I ain't that vulgar, I ain't that rude, but you are to your conditions. So anyway, let's move on. Because I'll recap this. So what happens is, I talked about the attitude of intolerance and indifference. If a person don't believe that 12-step principles can help them like they have somebody else, then, hold up, I did something. Are you sure you want to remove? No, I don't. So a person could have an attitude of intolerance or indifference towards spiritual principles. And the only thing that's saying is that they don't believe that the program could help them like they help somebody else. In dealing in 12-step recovery, the attitude must be, if it helped him, it can help me. If it helped her, it can help me. That's just basically it. So then it's the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness. A person has to learn how to be honest. Now, for me, there's a difference between honesty and telling the truth. Where telling the truth is a verbal statement about whatever you're telling the truth about, that's being truthfulness. However, honesty in the recovery sense is a verbal statement followed by a supportive behavior of that statement. For example, if I say I'm in recovery, that means I'm gonna have a behavior that's constant with being in recovery. And what's a behavior that's constant to being in recovery? The 12 and 12. Yeah, somebody should be able to see me at meetings, reading a book, or around other recovering people, so forth and so forth. Open-mindedness. Open-minded or open-mindedness is just simply simply listening to another's point of view, or, check this out, just having an open mind to what's around me. Because a lot of times, open-mindedness can mean more than just listening to what somebody has to say or somebody else's opinion without changing your mind. And I believe that's called being subjective. But however, open-minded could be, meditation. When a person is meditating or praying, in my view, they're in a state of open-mindedness. Your mind is open. And then there's willingness. And willing, inside of being willing, or inside the willingness piece, that means that a person is just prepared. Keeping it simple. And this is what is needed when approaching the steps. Now, I want to read something, so let me jump down and get my book. I'm going to disappear for a second. And I got it. And I want to go to page 83 in the AA Big Book, because this is very important. And when I read this a while back, man, it really touched me. And this is what it says. It says the spiritual life is not a theory. It says we have to live it. The spiritual life is not a theory. The spiritual life is not a theory. The more the individual lives and practice 12-step recovery, eventually, it's not no eventually, it's going to be something that has to be done. Now, what level, I can't answer that. I can't say, I can't say, well, you got to live it. You just got to do your best. Because if not, let me get my coffee. I got some coffee over here. A little bit left too. What will happen is, and when I say spiritual life, I mean living by spiritual principles, not religious principles. Sorry. Like I said earlier, there's programs for that. This ain't one of them. I lost one of my cameras. Which one, I don't know. Oh, Sookie, man, it's always something going on. But anyway, I got two more. So anyway, I got my main camera. So anyway, last night I lost one. Now I lost camera. And I better plug this back in. Give me a second. I ain't gonna tell y'all what's going on. But there we go. So anyway. All right. Okay, so we back into action. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to talk about the 12 steps. Okay, I read about we must live the spiritual life, and that's by spiritual principles. And honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness are the backbone of recovery. Without that, number one, let me back up a little bit. Without an attitude of intolerance or difference towards spiritual principles, you will not recover, period. There's humility in one's life that has to set the stage. And if hitting bottom didn't do that to you, what's going to happen eventually, you're going to experience jail's death, dereliction, institutions, or relapse. That's what's going to be experienced. So moving on. We come to the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness. And I gave my definitions of those, and I'm quite sure some more, but I gave mine. And once these are established, and you ain't got to get it perfect, you just have to have a certain level of. So moving on, now we're moving. So with the excuse me, with the attitude of intolerance and indifference, and the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness, you're at ground zero. In other words, you're ready to recover, or let me say, the stage is set. I can't say you're ready, but I will say the stage is set for your first step. Because a lot of times people want to send people to the first step. Go to the first step, go to first steps. First step don't mean you don't have to use. Well, let's see what the first step what's really saying. And this is just a surface view of all the steps that I'm about to do. The first step says, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. And remember what I said earlier. I said, when I use the term we, I mean mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And it says, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. And what we're looking at is, what you're looking at is, if you read it like it says, and you're reading something that has already happened, you're reading something, you're reading an experience that has already happened, and what you're about to do is prepare yourself to go back into that experience and look at it from the eyes of the 12 steps. That's what's about to happen. And what the first step is also saying to you is, not only are you about to go back, but you're about to see what influence you were under other than the drugs. Although in some material it says step 1 means we don't have to use anymore, it means exactly that, but also step 2 through 12 mean the same thing. Because you can not only use in step 1, you can't use in none of them. The program requires you not to do that. So that being said, it says, we admitted, so you admitted with your heart, your mind, your body, your soul, and all your emotions that you were powerless over addiction. And it doesn't mean alcohol. It doesn't mean, not only alcohol, not only drugs, not only prostitution, not only overeating, not only promiscuous sexual activity or being a hoe. Call it what it really is, or being a hoe. And that's a man or a woman. Not only over gambling, not only over the selling and the using of drugs and alcohol. And I said selling and using. Not only were you powerless over addiction, meaning the obsessive and compulsive behavior, but it brought your life into a certain amount of unmanageability. Most extreme is that you became homeless, or somebody had to take over your affairs, or your quality of life was not evident as if you were managing it, quote unquote, normally. I'm going to say that. So it says that your life had become unmanageable. But however, because your denial is broken, you're able to see that. And the addiction resulted from what? From your first bout of trauma. Whether it's acute, whether it's post PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome, whether it's chronic or whether it's complex. Doesn't matter. But this is how deep you going. And then in the second step it says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So a lot of people want to take this to the God. Oh, God, my higher power. And they stuck on that. But in some literature, and anybody will tell you that, guess what's a power greater than you? Your addiction. Whatever your, and its symptoms, mind you. It's a power greater than you. The fact that you hit bottom was greater than you, than your own will. When I talked about the will being the obsessive, the obsession, I believe it is. Let me fire it back. Let me go back. When I talked about obsessive and compulsive behavior, and in the part where it said compulsion, one having started the process of, and the process of what? Of addiction. Started the process of addictive or addictive behavior with what? With what? One pill, one fix, or drink, or spoonful, game of chance, sexual behavior, prostitution. It says what? We cannot stop through our own power of will, our own power. So you can't stop because it's something dominating your own power. And that's what step 2 is telling you. It's telling you that, check this out. Until you come to believe that it's other powers greater than you, bigger than yours. But what the ego says is, it's just me and God. It's just me and God. And my God got me. Now, some people, that could be true. I mean, that's not my experience. But what I do understand about me is there are other powers out there that are very influential over me. This is what I have to be careful of, and that's why I need this program to work in what? Any area of my life. And another thing, like I mentioned before, there are certain materials out here that state, unless you get this second step, you will not get recovery, and I'm going to go straight there and tell you why. Because you will not have a spiritual awakening, which the 12th step alludes to, when it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of what? These steps. So moving on to the 3rd step. So let's get to the God piece. Let's get to the God piece. And the God piece states, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. It says we. And remember, when I talked about the we, I meant mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. We put our whole selves into it, the I am. We put the I am into it. And that decision was made of our own based on step 1 and step 2 evidence. So what I did was I took all my power and I focused it into one central energy. Now you can call it what you want at this point. And that's the freedom. You can call it Jesus, you can call it Muhammad, you can call it Abraham, whatever it is, a rock, a dog, a cat. Because what's going to eventually be seen is that as we go on through the step process, we're going to see what really was, we're going to see what your God is, right? And that's why it takes a lot of courage to do this program. Because what's about to happen after the third step, you're going to get cleared. You're going to start working on clearing yourself of a lot of stuff that's causing stuff. You know, like my friend Allison Simpson says, stuff. You're about to clear yourself of a lot of stuff that held you captive for so long, that stopped you from connecting with the primary energy, the God energy, the one energy. Some of us got three, but I'll just say the one. And so it says, we made a decision to turn our will. And what's our will? You know, and it's a lot of things could be said about that. But I'm going to say, take your will and go back to the mental, take your will and go back to the mental, physical, and spiritual and emotional part, and there you will find your own will. A lot of times lives. So when it says inside the third step, it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives. So the will is the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional part. And the lives is the plane that they represent. But however, they're one. So the lives, because it's spelled with Lives. So a lot of times people say, well, you know, it's my home life, it's my work life, it's my da-da-da. No, it's your mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, and how they interact. Because your physical life and your mental life is not on the same plane. Your mental life is a physical manifestation. Your mental life is a physical manifestation, and so is your spiritual life. They are physical man, but there's separate, but one. You have what we're learning is to train them to become one. That's how reservation and relapse kick in, is because one of those four areas or more, and really I say it takes two areas or more to relapse. When you're in two, you're in danger. All you need is one more of those entities to be off, and you're gonna go do something you don't want to do, and end up somewhere you don't want to be. So going through, it says over to the care. So I remember, like, I was rapping with this person. You know, we was kicking the bobos and stuff like that. And this is what they said. They said this to me. They said, well, you know, I was an alcoholic. I said, yeah. They said, yeah, I was an alcoholic. But I got saved and I gave it all to God. I was like, man, how fortunate. You ain't got to do no work. But for the recovering person, it's different. We turn it over to the care of. And we're about to find out what it is that we turn over to the care. And all that mean is, when I turn it over to the care, is anything that I can't do, that primary energy will handle it. But I must give it what? Effort. The spiritual principle of effort. The advantage that that 12-step recovery have over mostly, and I said mostly, all other modalities of healing in the 12 steps, our modality of healing is that we got to put the work in. Damn right. That's why we got 12 steps. And they say this, remember this saying? Take the steps up because the elevator's broke. And that's what makes this modality, before I go into step 4 and on, this modality of healing so powerful and so cleansing. Because you do your own work. You ain't turning nothing over to Jesus. You ain't turning nothing over to Allah, to Yahweh. Now, there's people that do that. I can't comment on that because it's not my experience, like I said before. In 12-step recovery, we do the work. We do this. We do all the work to the best of our ability. We give this program anything. We give anything and all we got as much as we can stand. And that's the merciful part of this program. And that's why when the old timers would tell you back in the day, they would say, the God of your understanding, say, make sure it's loving and caring. Loving and caring. And I just included merciful. So make sure it's loving and caring. Why? Because when you start going through the 12-step process of healing, anything after the 4th step, because steps 1, 2, and 3 lay the foundation for the purging,